So this is how you install the application. You have an executable file for this desktop application. Just click on the file. A window pops up and you just have to click yes. This is another window summarizing the characteristics of this GUI, Graphical User Interface, which is just an application. You can see that the description is here. We have a graphical user interface where time signals can be loaded using three different options. The first option is to use a screenshot file, so you just have to take a screenshot of a graph, namely a price chart. And we will see how to do that. The application then will be able to extract a time series from a picture, and then we will do an analysis from that. But there are other two options. You can also load a text file or an Excel file. More specifically, the following type of files can be loaded by clicking the Run button. We can either load a JPG file, which is the screenshot, or a text file, or Excel file, and these are the extensions of the files. The text file or Excel file have to contain either an n/2 matrix, whose second column is the time series and its first column is the corresponding time vector. We might see something here as well, or maybe also an n/1 matrix containing the time series only. So we must have like a column of values, and those values are the prices, for example, of a certain currency with respect to another currency, or the prices of gold, or the prices of another type of material, or whatever you want. Those values are prices. If we only have one column, then it is the user who has to insert the sampling frequency of these values. For example, if you have a chart where you have a value every day, for example, then the sampling frequency would be 1/time. So if you enter days, it will be a sample a day. So the time axis will be reported in days, whereas the frequency axis will be reported in days to the -1. And you can enter either 1 day frequency or 24 hours, or you can also enter minutes if you want. But you have to remember the unit that you have inserted. Let's see more about this. Let's click next, and then I have to select an installation folder, and I might also add a shortcut to the desktop. Let me choose a folder here. I will select a folder that I have already created, this one here, then select, then next. And then this GUI will be installed automatically, so it will not take much time. As you can see, let's wait for the installation to occur. And here we are. So we have finished. Let's go to the folder that I have selected. So you can see that I have another folder here called application. If I click on this folder, you can see another executable file called pricechartanalysis.exe. It's an executable file that I have here, and if you click on this, you will run the application. Another option is to use this same file on my desktop. You can see here that I also have the same file on my desktop, because I have selected the option to add a shortcut to the desktop. So I'm going to click on this, but it makes no difference. Here you can see that we have the GUI window popping up. It's an interface that I will explain to you now. If you want to load a screenshot, you first have to create a screenshot, right? So let's do it step by step. I will explain what these buttons are, and you can see that you also have a help button. If you click on this help button, there is a description popping up, which is exactly the same description that you also have in the installation procedure. It's a brief explanation, recapping the files that you can load. First, let's take a screenshot. Let's go to the internet and let's write price chart. For example, here we have cryptocurrency prices, charts, daily trends, market cap, and I will click on this. It's the website called Coinbase. It's a well-known website especially for cryptocurrencies. I've never used it, so I'm not really comfortable with the use of this website because I don't know much about it. But for example, let's click on Bitcoin. If you click on Bitcoin here, you will have a chart, as you can see. And unfortunately, this page here is in Italian. Let me see if I can translate it in English. Let me scroll down. And here we have the option to change the language. Let's go to English. And here we are. These are the prices of Bitcoin over the last year. So We currently are in 2022, so the x-axis here ranges from February 2021 to January 2022. It's the price over 1 year. So if you choose to analyze Bitcoin price over the last year, this is the plot that you need to select. If you want to do an all-time analysis, you have to choose all year, and this is the price starting from about August 2013, all the way up to January 2022. So if you're not interested in analyzing Bitcoin price in the short term, this might be the graph that you want to take. For example, let's assume that we want to operate on a daily basis. We might be interested in a 1-day price chart, this one here, and so on and so forth. We also have the option to analyze the price over the last hour, from 9 a.m. to 9:53 a.m. Let's try to analyze the all-time option here. So if you want to do this, we need to capture the screen. We have to take a screenshot of this plot here, and I will take it like this, so that I have just the pure plot. Let me save it. I will save it in a folder that I have just created here. For example, let me call it Bitcoin all time. The extension of the file, as you can see, is JPG with uppercase letters. Let me save it. And now let's go back to our GUI. I will run the GUI, so we click on run, and as you can see, we can either insert a screenshot or a time series, so we must have a text file or an Excel file. I will start by uploading a screenshot file. So let me go to my folder and let me select Bitcoin alltime.jpg here. As you can see here, we have the plot of the chart, and it's quite ugly. You can see that there is a yellow background, and the line related to the prices is blue here. But don't worry, this will just be extracted from here. The first thing that this GUI will ask is if I want to extract a particular situation. What is a situation here? What do I mean by a situation? A situation is simply a portion of this plot here. So for example, if I want to extract the portion between 0.5 and 0.8, I will just simply type, I will click yes, and then I will have to type 0.5 to 0.8, and then I can extract only that portion. So I will click no, I don't want to do this now. And also take a look at the x-axis here. It goes from 0 to 1 because time is normalized here, so I will consider just 1 unit of time from 0 to 1 when I have a screenshot. That's not really important. If you load an Excel file or a text file, you will have the possibility to have whatever units you want in the x-axis, but if you upload a screenshot, you will have a normalized time axis. So let's move forward. Now I have the possibility to do a preliminary analysis of the signal, and I will click yes in this case. And I can plot either the PSD, and I will talk about the PSD, and also the time series. So let's select both of them and click OK. As you can see here, in the first figure, I have the same plot that I have here on the right, the yellow one. So from the yellow one, which is the screenshot itself, but when I use the GUI, this is the way it appears. It appears like this because it is an image, and when you consider an image, the colors simply represent the intensities of the screenshot. So you can think of this as a matrix with pixels, right? So if I zoom in, here I will see some pixels, as you can see. So these are the intensities of the figure. So it is a matrix. And what this GUI is going to do, it is going to extract the blue line and it will put it into a vector so that the vector can be analyzed. Because it is more difficult to analyze this image, we can simply analyze a vector. It is like a function in mathematics. We have a curve plotted against the x-axis, and for each x value we have a y value, so it is like a function. By knowing that this line here is blue and the background is a different color, in this case yellow, the GUI is capable of extracting the prices And you can see that in this case we only have a curve. So I can click on each point of the curve, for example here, this point here. And the values on the x-axis and the y-axis are normalized. So the y-axis goes from 0 to 1, whereas the time axis goes from 0 to 1. So I don't really care about the absolute values on the y-axis. So if we have bitcoins, for example, this value here can be more than 1. Of course, it can be $30,000, $40,000, something like that. But in this case, I'm not interested in the absolute values. What I'm interested in is considering percentages. So you can think of this as percentages. And I'm interested in the increase or decrease of this function, let's call it function, over time. We know that on the time axis, we are considering values that range from 2014 to 2022. So we are basically considering years. So if we want, we can scale the time axis. It's not complicated, right? And then what do I have in this other figure? This is the PSD of the price chart. In particular, this represents the energy of the signal. And when I say signal, I mean this curve here. Let's call it signal or function or time series. So when I say one of these words, I really mean this curve here. So this represents the energy over frequency. And the frequency, as you can see, goes from 0 to this value here, to the bottom right. And that value is the sampling frequency divided by 2. So the sampling frequency was calculated by the GUI. And how did it calculate it? It was calculated from here. It was assumed that time goes from 0 to 1, and we have some number of samples here. As you can see here, we have this sample, this sample, this sample, this sample, and so on and so forth. Based on the number of samples and the time axis, one can find the value for the sampling frequency. And this is the value that comes out if you do the calculation. Frequency here is time to the minus 1, right? So if we, for example, if we use seconds in time, this is seconds to the minus 1, and that would be hertz. If we use years, we have 1 over years. If we use hours, we have 1 over hours. Whereas on the y-axis, we have decibels. I have represented the y-axis using decibels. So decibels can be used to represent the y values in a logarithmic scale. This can be useful because it manages to represent different orders of magnitude much closer to each other. Because from, for example, minus 60 to minus 80 decibels, we have different orders of magnitude. And the maximum of this function, of this PSD curve, which is really the spectrum of the chart, occurs at low frequencies, so it is near zero. Why is that? Well, it is quite easy to figure out because this function here has some small oscillations, as you can see. There are some oscillations and you can see them here, but the dominating frequencies are low frequencies here. It is quite simple to visualize. This is the information that we get from the spectrum, okay? And let's do more considerations. Let me also close this figure because I don't need it anymore. Then there is another question that we have from the GUI. The GUI asks us if we want to filter the signal based on the PSD plot, which is the spectrum. Well, we might try to filter the signal, for example, from 0 to 50 here, because this is where we have the most interesting frequencies, or we can also go from 0 to a lower value if you want. And so let's try to make an analysis here, and I will click yes, and I have to enter the low frequency of the passband filter, 0, and I want to go all the way up to 50. And here we are. If I consider these two plots one more time, you can see that I have filtered the signal from 0 to 50 and I have eliminated the highest frequencies. For example, here you can see that I have eliminated frequencies which are higher than 50. so I can understand more easily this filtering tool. The filtering tool is very useful because I can try to eliminate the unnecessary fluctuations of the price chart, and I can try to figure out what is the most probable tendency of the price, if it increases or decreases. In this case, the filtering procedure here tells me that near the end point, there is a high probability that the price is going to decrease, for example. But you always have to try to reason and not just do your considerations blindfolded, because this analysis depends on the length of the time period that you are analyzing. In this case, we are analyzing years. There are like 8 years between the initial value and the final value here. So you have to be careful. This is just a general consideration. This is not financial advice or anything like that. This is just a tool that can be used to have more information in order to make an educated guess. But there is no guarantee that prices will have a certain tendency, especially because you also have to increase your expertise. It does not suffice to entrust an application with the difficult task of predicting future prices. Okay, so now let's consider also this box that we have. We have a statistical parameters box, and this box here shows you some parameters pertaining to the curve that we have analyzed. In particular, we have the kurtosis, which is the fourth order statistical parameter of the time series. Then we have the variance, the root mean square, RMS, and the peak value. These are some statistical parameters that I'm not going to discuss. And I will close this box. Then you can see that we also have the PSD and the reference signal plotted in here. So we have two figures here that were generated by the preliminary analysis that we have made. We have filtered the signal that from blue became the red one, and then we also have filtered the PSD as a consequence, and therefore the PSD will go from 0 to 50 because we have filtered out all the frequencies from 50 to about 450 here. And this 450 is actually, if we enlarge this region here, it is about 479, which was the initial Nyquist frequency. What is the Nyquist frequency? The Nyquist frequency is the sampling frequency divided by 2. It has to do with the sampling theorem. I will not delve into these details. It is not really important now. But after we have filtered the signal, the frequency will become smaller because we can downsample our initial time series. So I will not discuss what downsampling means. We can do that because we can filter out higher frequencies in the signal. So we can downsample the signal. We can reduce the size of the samples of the signal. That's more or less the intuitive meaning of that. If the Nyquist frequency becomes more or less equal to 50, then it means the sample frequency has become equal to 100. And you can see the value 100 here. You can also open this plot in another figure by clicking on this button. And here we have the same figure that we had before. This figure here was the red curve, the one that we obtained after filtering. In this case, it appears blue. And we also have the filtered PSD that we can also plot here. We have other options. For example, we can calculate the spectrogram of the curve. First, we have to know what is the spectrogram. Basically, the spectrogram represents the frequencies over time. So it describes how the spectrum changes over time. Let's try to calculate it for 10 levels in time and 10 levels in frequency. And here we have a spectrogram. This might be useful for understanding the non-stationarities of the signal. So you can see that on the x-axis here we have time, and the initial time here was about, remember, 2014. And you can see that the most intense colors are at the bottom of this plot. Here we have the yellow color, which is not so intense. This plot will become more intense here at about 0.4 in the bottom part, and more intense as we approach the bottom right. What does this mean? It means that at the beginning, the price did not change too much. There were not many non-stationarities in the signal, and it is evident here because at the beginning, the price of Bitcoin was more or less flat. You can see that the curve flattens out in the bottom left, and suddenly at 0.5 is where we have these non-stationarities, and the value of the price increases a lot. I think that was about 2017, and if we go here, we can see that indeed we are in 2017 when there is this spike where people started to understand the potential of bitcoins. Then there was a decrease, but still bitcoin was fairly volatile here. It started to become more and more volatile because people started to speculate more and more when it came to Bitcoin because they understood that this currency has a lot of potential. And then there is another boom in 2021, most likely due to the pandemic. There is this amazing surge at the beginning of 2021, and we can see that in the time frequency analysis if we consider the spectrogram, because it is exactly here in this region that we see that spike. Higher frequencies become more and more dominating as we approach the bottom right, which means namely 2021, 2022. And it's due to the fact that more and more people started to invest money on Bitcoin. So this spectral analysis is very useful for understanding non-stationarities, especially. So we can try to understand the hustle and bustle of how the market works. Then we also have other options. Let me close these plots here. We can either save the reference signal, which is this curve here, and if we click on this save button, we can choose a folder. For example, the same folder that I'm using for this tutorial. Select the folder, and then I can save the signal in different formats. I first have to choose the name of the file. I can call it xref, okay? And then I can choose the extension of the file. It can be a txt file, which means a text file, then an Excel file, or also a MATLAB file. If you want, you can also save it as a MATLAB file. I'm going to save it as a txt file, and then click OK. If I open the folder, text file here, it's xref. This is the way that it appears. These are the values of the price. Therefore, these are the samples that we are considering. We also have the frequency, which is written in here. And for example, if I want to load the text file, I have to click on Run again, click OK. Then I'm going to select the text file here, xref. Then I have to choose whether this file contains only the time series or also the time vector. But it is the first case, so the file only contains the time series, so I will click OK here. And I also have to enter the sampling frequency, which was 100, if you remember, and click OK. And then, of course, I still get the same questions. I get asked if I want to extract one particular situation from the signal, and I click no. And in this case, I'm going to click yes, I want to do a preliminary analysis, and I will plot both the PSD and the time series. And here we are. We have the same plots as before. But in this case, we have loaded the text file. And then here we still have the same statistical parameters and the plots. Here I can calculate the spectrogram. The PDF. The PDF is the probability density function, so it is not the PDF document, which stands for portable document format. But in this case, PDF here is the probability density function, and if I click on PDF, here I have to enter the number of bins. What is the number of bins? The bins are related to the ranges of the variable. In this case, the variable is a currency. So the larger the number of bins, the more intervals we have in the probability density function. Let's choose 20, for example. It's not really important. You can try to change this parameter and try to figure out how this affects the calculation. Click OK. And this is the PDF of the curve. You can see that the most recurring values are near 0. This is also evident from the plot itself, because the most recurring values are here from 0 to 0.4 in the x-axis, and you can do your considerations. You also have other options. At the top of this GUI, you can see that I can also click this button, analysis of two signals. If I click this button, I have to insert two signals. So let's click OK. I have to insert a first file containing the first plot that I want to analyze, the first curve. I have prepared some other pictures, some other screenshots. For example, this one here called Bitcoin. It is the price chart in a time interval of about 4 hours. This is not a recent picture. It is from last year, or maybe even older than that. I don't remember, but it is a price chart for Bitcoin. I don't want to extract any situation from the chart. And then I have to insert another signal. I click OK, and I will insert another screenshot. In this case, for example, Bitcoin 5. You can see here that this screenshot is not really clean. It is quite dirty. It has this orange line and also this text, which is written in Italian, but that's not important. And probably when the signal is going to be extracted, it will not be perfect. So let's see that. Whereas this one here, I expect that it will be extracted properly because it is cleaner. I don't want to extract anything. Here we have the statistical parameters of the signals that I'm not going to analyze. This is the second signal that I have inserted. You can see that this plot here is quite dirty, especially on the bottom left. These fluctuations here are not real. Why is that? Well, if I open the file that I have inserted, you can see that from here, you can see this line and also this text. In particular, this text here is what made this portion of the signal quite dirty, because the GUI was not capable of understanding whether that was actually price, it was a part of the curve, or it was something unrelated. So it was not capable of discerning this text from the curve itself, and it made a mess because it created these fluctuations. This is just something that I wanted to show you. So you have to try to take screenshots that are as clean as possible. If you want, you can also plot the other reference signal, the reference signal number 1, and it is this one. In this case, it is cleaner, as you can see. This was the following screenshot here. And you can see that the two plots are more or less the same, except for maybe the right part. Here you can see that there are some fluctuations which are probably due to this line and especially this red dot. So you have to try to be careful when you take screenshots. You have to make sure that they are clean. This is what I wanted to show you. In this case, you can also calculate, for example, the spectrogram, and let's calculate it. And we are going to get the spectrogram of both curves, of both time series. You can see that the highest intensity is captured in the low frequency range at every instant of time, more or less. Then you also have the possibility to save the signals, and that's more or less it. These are just the basics of this GUI, so I can perfect it. I will add other features in the future. I haven't explained all these buttons. It is not really essential. For example, the spectral kurtosis, this is not something that I want to explain. It's not really necessary. And then I have other buttons that I can click. For example, this one, XY axis range of open figures. Let's try to explain what that button is. It is not really fundamental. If I open, for example, this plot, you can see that this plot ranges from 0 to 600 Hertz, more or less. And on the Y-axis, we go from minus 250 to 0 decibels. And if I click this button, I can change the ranges of the X and Y axis, and this is figure 51. So for example, here I have to insert 51, which is the handle of the figure, and then if I want to change the X range, for example, I can go from 0 to 300, whereas on the Y range I can go from minus 200 to 0. And if I click OK, the X-axis ranges from 0 to 300 indeed, and the Y-axis ranges from minus 200 and 0. That's not really important. I can also change the font size of this figure. For example, I can choose 15, and you can see that the font size changes accordingly. And I think that this is a useful application, a useful GUI, which people can use to make educated guesses on how to predict changes in prices of currencies, of materials, of stocks, of food, of whatever you like, basically, if you have a time chart.